Learn English with English Thing Lab.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're starting a new story, a mystery story, a story about the world's most famous detective, Sherlock Holmes.
Don't worry if you've never read Sherlock Holmes before. We're going to tell the story in simple English, slowly, clearly, and naturally.
As you listen, try to think like a detective. Pay attention to the details because every clue matters.
Let's begin. It was a cold morning in London. The sky was gray. Light rain fell outside. Sherlock Holmes was sitting in his apartment at 221B Baker Street. He was reading a newspaper. His friend, Dr. Watson, was sitting nearby. He was drinking tea and reading a book. The apartment was quiet, very quiet. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, 3 quick knocks. "Come in," said Holmes. The door opened. A woman entered the room. She looked worried. Very worried. She was wearing an elegant blue coat, but her face looked tired. She seemed nervous. "Good morning," Holmes said. "Please sit down." The woman sat in a chair. Her hands were shaking slightly. "My name is Mrs. Parker," she said, "and I need your help." Holmes put down his newspaper. Now he was interested. "What happened?" he asked. Mrs. Parker took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "Last night I attended a dinner party. It was a very important event. There were many guests." Holmes listened carefully. Watson listened too. Mrs. Parker continued, "I wore my most valuable necklace. A family necklace. It is over 100 years old." Watson looked surprised. "That sounds very valuable," he said. Mrs. Parker nodded. "Yes. It is worth thousands of pounds." Holmes remained silent. He was thinking. "Please continue," he said. Mrs. Parker nodded. "Everything was normal during the dinner. I talked with friends. I danced. I enjoyed the evening. Then I returned home. And this morning—" She stopped speaking. Holmes leaned forward. "And this morning?" he asked. Mrs. Parker looked down. The necklace was gone. The room became silent. Watson lowered his cup. "Gone?" he asked. "Completely gone," said Mrs. Parker. "I searched everywhere. My bedroom, my bag, my car, everywhere. But I couldn't find it." Holmes stood up and slowly walked to the window. Rain continued to fall outside. "Interesting," he said quietly. Then he turned back toward Mrs. Parker. "Tell me something. Did anyone know you were wearing the necklace?" Mrs. Parker thought for a moment. "Yes?" "Many people saw it." Holmes nodded. "And did anything unusual happen during the evening?" Mrs. Parker frowned. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then suddenly, her eyes widened. "Actually, there was something strange." Holmes smiled slightly. "What was it?" he asked. Mrs. Parker leaned forward. "There was a man I had never seen before. He kept watching me all night." Holmes and Watson exchanged a quick look. The mystery had begun. The room was quiet. Mrs. Parker sat nervously in her chair. Sherlock Holmes stood near the window, thinking. A strange man, a missing necklace, and a dinner party with many guests. Holmes turned around. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Mrs. Parker nodded. The dinner started at 7 o'clock. There were about 30 guests. "Did you know all of them?" Holmes asked. "No," she replied. "Most of them, but not everyone." Holmes slowly sat down. "And the man who watched you? Can you describe him?" Mrs. Parker thought carefully. "He was tall. He wore a black suit. And he had a gray hat." Watson looked surprised. "That's not much information." Mrs. Parker sighed. "I know. I only saw him a few times." Holmes nodded. Sometimes small details were enough. "Did he speak to you?" "No, never." "Did he speak to anyone else?" "I'm not sure." Holmes remained silent for a moment. Then he asked another question. "When was the last time you saw the necklace?" Mrs. Parker answered immediately. "At the dinner." "I remember looking at it in a mirror. It was still around my neck." Holmes leaned forward. "And after that?" Mrs. Parker hesitated. "I don't know. I never checked again." Watson looked at Holmes. "That means it could have disappeared at any time." "Exactly," said Holmes. The detective stood up. "Watson, I think we should visit the house where the dinner took place." Mrs. Parker looked hopeful. "You think you can find it?" Holmes smiled slightly. "I don't know yet. But I believe every mystery leaves clues." A short time later, Holmes and Watson arrived at the large house. The party was over. The rooms were empty. The music was gone. Only silence remained. Holmes slowly walked through the main hall. He looked at the floor, the windows, the tables, everything. Watson watched him carefully. "You always look at everything," Watson said. Holmes smiled. "Most people see." "Detectives observe." They entered the ballroom, the place where guests had danced the night before. Suddenly, Holmes stopped. "What is it?" Watson asked. Holmes pointed toward the floor. Near one of the tables, something was shining. Watson bent down. It was a small silver button. "A button?" Watson asked. Holmes picked it up. "Interesting." The button did not match Mrs. Parker's clothes. It did not belong to the staff either. Holmes placed it carefully in his pocket. Then he noticed something else. A small scratch on the wooden floor. Very small, almost invisible. Watson could barely see it, but Holmes was smiling now. That usually meant one thing. He had found a clue, and somewhere in London, a thief was becoming nervous. The next morning, Sherlock Holmes was sitting in his apartment. The silver button was lying in the table. Holmes stared at it quietly. Watson was reading a newspaper nearby. For almost 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. Then suddenly, Holmes stood up. "I know where this button came from." Watson lowered his newspaper. "You do?" Holmes nodded. "Not exactly who owns it, but I know the type of jacket." Watson looked interested. How? Holmes picked up the button, looked carefully. Watson examined it. There was a small symbol on it, a crown, and underneath it, 2 letters, RH. Watson frowned. I've never seen that before. Holmes smiled. Neither have most people. A few hours later, Holmes and Watson visited a famous clothing shop in London. The owner examined the button. Immediately, he recognized it. This button comes from a custom-made jacket. Only a few were produced. Holmes became interested. Who bought them? The owner checked an old book. Then he found the information. There were 3 customers. Holmes listened carefully. The first name meant nothing to him. The second name also seemed unimportant. But the third name made Holmes smile very slightly. Watson noticed immediately. You found something. Perhaps, Holmes replied. The third customer was named Richard Hall, a businessman, and according to the records, he had attended Mrs. Parker's dinner party, the same dinner party where the necklace disappeared. Watson looked excited. So he's the thief. Holmes shook his head. Not yet. Never jump to conclusions. That's how detectives make mistakes. Later that afternoon, Holmes and Watson visited Richard Hall's office. Hall welcomed them politely. He looked calm and confident, almost too confident. Holmes asked simple questions about the dinner party, about the guests, about Mrs. Parker. Hall answered everything easily. Then Holmes noticed something, a small detail, a very small detail. Hall was wearing a black jacket, but one button was missing. Exactly one. Watson saw it too. His eyes widened, but Holmes remained calm. He said nothing. After a few more questions, they left. Outside, Watson could no longer stay quiet. The missing button. The jacket! It has to be him. Holmes continued walking. I agree that it looks suspicious. But something doesn't fit. Watson looked confused. What do you mean? Holmes stopped. Then he said quietly, if Hall stole the necklace. Why is he acting so relaxed? Watson thought for a moment. He didn't have an answer. Holmes looked down the street. People moved through the busy city. Carriages passed by. Shops were closing, and then something caught his attention. Across the street stood a man wearing a gray hat. A gray hat, exactly like the one Mrs. Parker had described. The man saw Holmes. For a brief second, their eyes met. Then the stranger quickly turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Holmes smiled. The mystery had just become much more interesting. Sherlock Holmes watched the man in the gray hat disappear into the crowd. Without saying a word, he started walking. Fast, very fast, Watson hurried after him. Holmes! Who is that man? Holmes kept moving. I don't know yet. But I intend to find out. They turned a corner, then another. The streets were crowded. People were everywhere. For a moment, the man seemed to be gone. Then Watson spotted him again. There! The man was walking quickly toward the train station. Holmes followed at a distance, carefully, patiently. The man entered a small cafe near the station. Holmes and Watson waited outside. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the man came out, but now he was carrying a small black case. Holmes noticed it immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. The man looked around nervously. Then he entered a narrow street. Holmes followed. Soon the stranger stopped in front of an old building. He opened the door and went inside. Holmes waited. Then he quietly approached the building. There was a small sign near the entrance. Watson read it. Jewelry repair shop. Holmes smiled. A jewelry shop. Now things are becoming clearer. The two men entered the building. Inside, an elderly jeweler was working behind a counter. The man in the gray hat was gone. Apparently, he had already left through a back door. But Holmes wasn't disappointed. Instead, he approached the jeweler. "Good afternoon." The jeweler looked up. "Good afternoon." Holmes placed a card on the counter. The jeweler's expression changed when he read the name. Sherlock Holmes. Immediately, he became nervous. Very nervous. Holmes noticed. Of course he noticed. "Yesterday," Holmes said calmly. "Did anyone bring a necklace here?" The jeweler hesitated. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he sighed. "Yes." Watson leaned forward. The jeweler continued. "A man came here late last night. He wanted to remove several diamonds from a necklace." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. This was important. Very important. "Did he leave the necklace?" Holmes asked. The jeweler nodded. Then he opened a drawer. Inside was a beautiful necklace. Mrs. Parker's necklace. Watson smiled immediately. "We found it." But Holmes remained thoughtful. Something still bothered him. The necklace was here. The diamonds were still here. Nothing had been sold, nothing had been stolen permanently. Why? Holmes looked at the jeweler. "Tell me." "Did the man seem rich?" The jeweler shook his head. "No." "He seemed desperate." Desperate. That word stayed in Holmes's mind. Suddenly, everything began to make sense. The button, the businessman, the man in gray hat, the missing necklace. All the pieces were finally coming together. Holmes smiled, a real smile this time. Watson immediately recognized it. Whenever Holmes smiled like that, the mystery was almost solved. "Watson," Holmes said quietly, "I know exactly what happened." Watson's eyes widened. "You do?" Holmes nodded. "Yes." "And tomorrow morning, we will meet the thief." The next morning, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson arrived at Baker Street early. A few hours later, Mrs. Parker arrived. She looked nervous, very nervous. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "have you found my necklace?" Holmes smiled. "Yes." "I have." Mrs. Parker's eyes widened. "You found it?" Holmes nodded. Then he placed the necklace on the table. Mrs. Parker gasped. "My necklace!" She picked it up carefully. The diamonds sparkled in the light. Everything was still there. Nothing was missing. "Thank you," she said. "I can't believe it." Watson smiled, but he was still confused. "Holmes," he said. "Who took it?" Holmes sat down. "Richard Hall." Mrs. Parker looked shocked. "The businessman?" Holmes nodded. Yes. Watson frowned. But what about the man with the gray hat? Holmes smiled. He was only part of the story. Everyone listened carefully. Holmes continued. Richard Hall attended the dinner party. He noticed the necklace, and he knew how valuable it was. Later that evening, he secretly removed it. Mrs. Parker looked surprised. But why? Holmes leaned forward. Because he had serious financial problems. He owed a lot of money. Watson looked surprised. He seemed wealthy. Exactly, Holmes replied. That is why nobody suspected him? Then Holmes continued. After taking the necklace, Hall contacted the man in the gray hat. The man worked for people who bought stolen jewelry. Mrs. Parker shook her head. So they were working together? Yes, said Holmes, but something unexpected happened. The man in the gray hat brought the necklace to a jeweler. He wanted to remove the diamonds, but before he could finish the job, Holmes smiled. We found them. Watson laughed. So the thief made a mistake. Several mistakes, Holmes replied. The missing button, the strange behavior, the visit to the jewelry shop. Every clue pointed in the same direction. Mrs. Parker looked relieved. I still don't understand how you noticed everything. Holmes smiled. Most people look. Detectives observe. Watson laughed. I've heard that before. Everyone smiled. For the first time since the mystery began, Mrs. Parker looked relaxed. She stood up and thanked Holmes and Watson again. Then she left with her necklace. The room became quiet. Watson sat down and poured himself some tea. Another mystery solved. Holmes picked up his newspaper. Yes, but London is a very large city, Watson. Watson smiled. And that means? Holmes smiled slightly. It means another mystery is probably waiting for us already. Outside, the rain began to fall softly over London, and somewhere in the city, a new adventure was beginning.